Hello, everybody. Sorry that I'm a little late this morning. Good to see you all. If you are in the house or at your house or watching later, welcome. Good to see you at this installment of Underground Seminary. Today we're going to look at some of the social principles. We won't get to all of them because it's a lengthier section. And in your, if you have a printed version, it's from the kind of this gold sheet onward, right? It's basically half of this whole book is the social principles. And so we won't go through all of them today, but we'll hit some majors for sure. And if we have time, kind of do a little bit of juxtaposition, because this is one of the areas, the social principles, that the General Conference is looking to just rewrite like wholesale. And maybe you saw one of the reasons why. And we'll get to that here in a little bit. If you are online, good to see you today. And we will meet today, we'll meet next Wednesday, and then next Wednesday we need to figure out, is that our last one? Next Wednesday is probably our last one, right? Because then we actually have General Conference. And so then we can kind of figure out with Dan, what might Underground Seminary look like after General Conference? Do we come back and maybe revisit some of this or unpack some of it? I don't exactly know, because we need to wait to see what happens at General Conference. Okay, with that, I'll do, because this is a new section, I'll just, instead of saying anything that you want to go back on, we won't do that today. I'll just kind of highlight if there's anything, or make space in the room if there's anything, or online if there's anything that you want to make sure that we kind of cover, or that you circled. Let's do that. Let's make space for that, and I'll make note of it in my documents as well. And if we get to that today, great. Otherwise, we'll get to it next time, and that'll be good depending on how far into the social principles it is. So let's pray. Gracious and loving God, on this Easter week in which we celebrate the resurrection of your Son, our Savior, we are grateful to be children of the light. And so show us your light. Give us the ways that you would have us go so that we might walk faithfully and fruitfully into the power of the Holy Spirit. It is in the name of the beloved one we pray. Amen. Is there anything in the social principles that you wanted, or that you highlighted or noted, that you want to make sure that we kind of touch on between now and the next couple of weeks? Was there anything in particular? Yeah, shoot. I see. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the question for those online, I think, is what's kind of the role of the social principles in the United Methodist Church, since it seems like they're not really addressed very often from pulpit or in courses, or you might not have even known that such a thing, such as the social principles, even existed until you engaged with this. And yet here we are having to rewrite them all now. So like what's the role of the social principles over time and whatnot? So good. Yeah, I'll do my best to touch on that. Any other thoughts, comments, insights that we want to make sure we touch on? In 1972, that was the first year that the current social principles was adopted. Maybe you caught that, maybe you didn't, I don't know. And in the social principles that we have, you'll notice that occasionally there are some footnotes that refer to judicial council decisions. And so by and large, when the United Methodist Church is in the news for something unrelated to like clergy scandals, the reason that we're in the news is because of something in the social principles. It's usually because someone in the church has challenged the social principles and therefore requires like judicial council decision. And so whenever there's a decree from a judicial council, that's like the Supreme Court of the United Methodist Church, that's sometimes notable or newsworthy, right? So those get footnoted. Maybe you saw some of those JC decisions there. In fact, even on page 105, right away, right? Judicial Council decision 833 and 1254, are referenced. The other time that I've experienced social principles kind of talked about is when there are people who are new to United Methodist Church and they come from another religious tradition or another denomination, really. It usually is, well, what's the United Methodist position on X? And the X is almost 100% whatever the hot button issue is of the day. And so, well, let's turn over to section G and we'll just read it, right? So the social principles in the life of the church have been incredibly informative and potent in guiding her kind of exercise of ethics and practice in the world. Now, it's also true that many of us violate the social principles on a daily basis, right? From a United Methodist standpoint, if you consume alcohol, for instance, right? That's not in line with the social principles. Or perhaps you have very, very strong feelings about pro-life, for instance, right? Maybe you read that the United Methodist social principles is got a more nuanced position than just pro-choice or pro-life, right? And so then that creates some angst in some folks, right? It's usually around those hot button issues that bubble up. The only other time that I see the social principles discussed in the life of the church is it relates to the social creed. And maybe you saw that in your book. I think we added it. Did we not, Dan? Yeah. On page 144 or paragraph 166 is our social creed. And that creed, right, should ring your ear because that word is used to describe other statements of faith, such as the Nicene Creed, Apostles' Creed, right? And so these creedal statements are another place in which the social principles are spoken from in my experience, that I've had experience with the social principles in a collective setting. By and large, I don't ever see much of the social principles talked about in the United Methodist Church, except for when General Conference comes around. I'm not saying they're unauthoritative or that they're problematic. I mean, they are incredibly authoritative for clergy, for sure, and for the church. They are principles. We call them principles for a reason. However, the current principles we have were adopted in 1972, and over the years, every General Conference, and again, maybe you saw this as you read, sometimes these principles read like they were written by 400 different authors. I don't know if you caught this, but sometimes there's some odd redundancies, or this sentence feels kind of like it just got shoved in there. I don't understand, okay, and now we're back on the main theme. It's lacking a lot of cohesion because since 1972 to now, every 4 years, around a hot button issue or around certain things, we as a general church then begin to wordsmith, right? Or some in a more beneficial way might say, we're trying to perfect, right, these social principles. And doing that in a large legislative body is somewhat difficult, to say the least. And so if you are reading and you're thinking, man, this must have been written by 1,000 people, the correct answer is it has been written by about 1,000 people, over the years, adding amendments and changes and modifications and tweaks and arguments about words, and people that love grammar love this stuff. Those of us who don't love grammar or don't get it are like, just tell me what it says, man. I don't know if it needs an Oxford comma or not, but just tell me what it means. If you'll notice at the bottom paragraph on page 105 in the preface, the social principles, this is to your point, while not to be considered church law, and those judicial council decisions referenced there define what we mean by church law, they are prayerful and thoughtful effort on the part of the General Conference to speak to the human issues in the contemporary world from a sound biblical and theological foundation as historically demonstrated in the UM traditions. They are a call to faithful and are intended to be instructive and persuasive in the best of the prophetic spirit. They call all members of the United Methodist Church to be prayerful, studied, dialogue with faith and practice. So, they are where they are. They are meant to be those guiding principles, right? So there's a lot of debate within those principles because that's what they are. They're meant to be debated. They're meant to be argued and tasseled with. To say that this is what it is and this is what it shall be forever, like Christ is Lord, right, isn't in the social principles, right? We've determined that is canon church law, pop. There's no debate about that anymore. There is debate about these. You did notice that the social principles are broken into major sections. The first section is called the natural world. And then the next section, the nurturing community. More than likely, those are just the sections we'll cover today. And then we'll look at the economic and the other parts next time. The social principles are structured similarly in the Bible, like to the Bible, in that these monikers or these titles are arbitrarily kind of drawn. So you might argue and say, well, why is culture and identity in the nurturing community when it really probably should be a part of some other section, right? So again, over time, these categories are meant to be helpful until they're kind of not. We're going to, I know that we'll get to the section on human sexuality in these sections, and I want to tell you, I want to warn you in advance, we'll highlight those, and I want to highlight what is being brought forth as a change for the revised social principles in their totality around human sexuality so that you can see the difference, okay? And see if you could affirm what's being proposed. Under the natural world, a couple of things. When we define it, right, air, water, soil, space are to be valued and conserved because they are God's creation, not solely because they are useful to human beings. This should provoke us, because in a capitalistic world, we view resources are there for our disposal and pleasure, and that the human being is the center of all that is. And so all that's in the natural world should be used to however humans want. And if it hurts the natural world, it shouldn't matter, because what's most important is the human at the center. But the social principles open with a line that says, no, in fact, all of those things should be valued and served purely because they are a part of God's beautiful creation and not because of the utility they provide, right? So that, for what it's worth, I find that to be one of the more prophetic statements that younger generations cling on to say, see, in our tradition, we don't think that all this talk about the environment is hooey. It's like the first one that we talk about in the social principles. It's like how we lead. So we should care about the fish and the birds. Even if they don't provide us any utility, they are beautiful creations of God. Full stop, On the next section there, it goes on to say, therefore, let us recognize the responsibility of the church and its members to place a high priority on changes in these economic, political, social, and technological lifestyles to support a more ecologically equitable and sustainable world leading to a higher quality of life for all of God's creation. There is an ongoing debate, right, particularly here in America, that, and I hear it time and time again, and sometimes it's really in partisan ways and sometimes it's not, but the idea of it pits the economic world and the environmental world in tension with one another. Well, we can't do green things because it will destroy our economy, right? And our economy is the more important thing than the nature thing, right? And so it pits these two things kind of against one another, right? That's not what we're saying at all, right? That there's actually a way for them to be congruent and harmonious. But when you and I engage with the rest of the world, we're given the framework to believe that they are actually in tension and incongruent with one another. And that, from a United Methodist standpoint, isn't true. We should recognize that we have a responsibility to hold all of these in tension, in right relationship, in order, right, to support a more ecologically equitable and sustainable world. So again, the arguments of, I'll just pick a hot button thing of people saying, well, I don't want to drive an electric vehicle because of X, Y, and Z, because electricity or battery powers are bad and awful, and if we're going to change everything over to battery power, then our economy's wrecked because it's all built on coal or whatever. Fine, got it. It's not one or the other, right? It's not one or other in the United Methodist social principles. We support and encourage, on Section A, real quickly, we support and encourage social policies to preserve and reduce the control of the creation industrial byproducts and waste. Again, notice that in a very standard way, the church is starting her social principles in a very typical systematic theological way. It's starting with a very, very big, right, before it starts with a very, very small. It starts with God and God's creation versus starting with like the human condition, right? And from there, it's moving from, it's moving from the very, very big and very, very broad down to the specific, right? Eventually we get to like the nurturing community, right? But first, we start in very, very big ways. Water, air, soil. I mean, these are the essentials of life, right? Halfway through, you'll notice it says we're deeply concerned about the privatization of water resources, the bottling of water to be sold as a commodity for profit, and the resources that go into packaging bottled water. Recently, I read that there's a product called Liquid Death. Have you heard of Liquid Death? It comes in a can. Sean's a big Liquid Death guy. It's a can. It's called Liquid Death. And it looks like it's a alcoholic, like kind of a hard seltzer. It's not. It's just water. It's called Liquid Death. And in part, it's called this for marketing purposes. It's just water. Like, it's not bubbly water. It's just water. It's just water. That's all it is. It's just water. But it's got packaging. It's in a can, and it's got like this edgy grunge like. And so, like, the idea, I think the marketing is that if you're out in the club or you're out with your friends and, you know, everybody's drinking something, you're holding on to Liquid Death, you know, real edgy. It's just water, dude. It's just water, right? But Liquid Death stock is like astronomically high and really, really highly valued because in the end, what we're just buying is the brand, right? We're kind of virtue signaling or signaling to others with this can that I am this type of person, right? I'm a little edgy, but I want to be part of the group, but I like the look and the feel of the skull and the Liquid Death, right? Sort of thing, right? Again, it's just water. It's just water. And maybe you remember a time whenever water wasn't for sale. Maybe the first time you ever saw water, like in the store, and you went to the supermarket or whatever, and they're like, bottled water, like, what the hell is it? What is this? We're selling water now? That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard, right? Jim Gaffigan has a bit that says, I bet he thinks it was the French that came up with this idea. He said, I bet I could tell those stupid Americans how to buy water. It's very funny. He does it better than I. But notice, I say all of that to say that we are concerned about how we privatize water resources, how we bottle it, and we sell it as a commodity. So as a church, we ought to maybe be concerned about how water gets commodified, even though it is an essential to life. What other essentials do we commodify? That creates problems. Under energy resources, we call upon all to take measures to save energy. Everyone should adapt his or her lifestyle to the average consumption of energy that respects the limits of this planet. For what it's worth, it says we encourage people to limit their CO2 towards the goal of 1 ton per person annually. The average American, for whatever it's worth, is at 15 tons per person annually. So we're not even close to 1 ton per annual energy CO2 emissions, right? So again, if we want to talk about social principles and how we're not upholding them, we're also not upholding this one, which is right off the get-go. We're all kind of failing in that way. And willingly so breaking it. We're not in any way modifying our lifestyle, right? We're making intentional everyday choices to contribute to 15 tons of CO2 emissions per year rather than trying to get to 1 ton. Right? And in fact, some of us are working really hard to argue or even belittle young people who are saying we should move towards 1 ton, right? The amount of vitriol and venom given towards Greta right? Like that's abhorrent, right? So again, I would just highlight that as a people, we have always been picking and choosing which principles, which verses, which values we are going to say are non-negotiable and should be upheld at the detriment of overlooking others that we so willfully break, right? And are able to justify rather easily, okay? So if you're going to come at the church and say, well, we're out of compliance with some social principles, I would say you're absolutely right. We're out of compliance with a lot of them, not just your pet favorite ones. And when I say we, as a reminder, it's a we, all of us. It's not just me or you. We all are breaking these. Finally, I won't spend a ton of time on this because I know that we're already halfway through the day. But if you want to look over on on page 109, paragraph subsection F, science and technology. We recognize science as a legitimate interpretation of God's natural world. Now, again, that is in juxtaposition to other more fundamentalist churches, right, who would say that science is in contradiction, right, that we're to pit the two against one another, that either the earth is 4,000 years old or it's 8 billion years old. You either choose the Bible version or you choose the science version. Are you with me? So in the United Methodist Church, this shouldn't be like that surprising or shocking to longtime UMCers. However, for many folks, that's like a thing. That we are saying that science is a legitimate interpretation of God's natural world. It goes on to say, we preclude science from making authoritative claims about theological issues, however, and from theology making authoritative claims about scientific issues. Which is why you didn't hear a ton of United Methodist clergy standing up and saying, let me tell you about the efficacy of the COVID-19 vaccine. Right? That's not our lane. We're not science people. We're theological people. And we didn't appreciate, as a church, we don't appreciate when scientists come along and say, undermine kind of theological claims. For instance, the amount of technology that's coming out of Silicon Valley that's merging humans with technology and making us kind of cyborgs, right? They're telling us it's for our good, right? That it enhances the human, that we're actually becoming transhuman, right? We're moving beyond human into something with goggles or whatever it might be. They're making a theological claim about what it means to be human. That's not appropriate. We're not going to make claims about science stuff. Science, you shouldn't be making claims about theological stuff. Are you with me? So there's a delineation there that the church recognizes, which I thought was helpful to point out, right? Any church member or clergy person in the UMC that starts making a ton of science claims, really, really be mindful that's out of compliance with our book of discipline and our social principles, and frankly, outside over our skis. The nurturing community on the next page, again, I'm on 110, and I know we're going a little quickly, but I want to make sure that we cover, this is a larger section here. And not that the first section is unimportant, but those questions, by and large, have been resolved by many of us in the United States and United Methodism. The questions that we have the most conversations about are in the nurturing community, which, from my vantage point, feels unfortunate. But that's more commentary than anything. On the preamble to nurturing community on page 110, the last little section there says, language of derogatory nature with regard to race, nationality, ethnic background, gender, sexuality, or physical differences does not reflect value for one another and contradicts the gospel of Jesus Christ. Just as a reminder, and maybe you learned this in kindergarten, I learned it in kindergarten, we don't make fun of people with disabilities. We don't use our language to degrade people of a different gender or a different sex or a different race. We don't do that. We don't, if you will, do harm, right? I read that somewhere else. Now, it's not just that we don't do those things. What's the second general rule of the church? Do no harm, do good. Do good. So it's not just, right, that we abstain from derogatory language. We also use language to do good and affirm and uplift. And so if I met someone, I had a friend growing up, his name is Bob. But when he was a kid, he wanted to be called Bobby. I didn't say, well, but your parents gave you that pronoun of Bob. Why are you saying you want to be called Bobby? Right? No. Call him Bobby, because that's what he wanted to be called. I didn't care. Didn't bother me. It's what he wanted to be called. He's Bobby. Fine. Move on. Right? We use language importantly, not to tear down, but also to build up. Which, if you've read Scripture in the New Testament and the epistles, you know that this is true. This is what the apostles write about. We use language to build up the body, right? So, individuals that use language to degrade, demonize, or destroy others because of their ethnic background, nationality, physical differences, sexual, whatever it is, be mindful. That is not in compliance with our social principles. If you look on the bottom of 110 there, under culture and identity, each of us has multiple identities of equal value that intersect to form our complete self. We affirm that no identity or culture has more legitimacy than other. There's a phrase or a word. Has anybody heard of the word intersectionality? Great, one. It's fine. You don't have to, no. But this is a helpful framework to understand the complexities of life. You already experienced this, but we don't think about it. Individuals who are in marginalized populations have helped us in majority populations to see the importance of this multiple identities, and the language they're calling it is intersectionality. It's helpful, and here's what I mean. Raise your hand if you're a parent. Okay, now keep your hand up if you're only a parent. That's your only identity. No, of course not. Right? Raise your hand if you're a child and a parent. Okay, now you have multiple identities, right? When you get together with family at Thanksgiving or Christmas, and you've got your parents and you've got your kids there, you are both child and parent, right? And so the dynamics in the room around that dinner table, you're having to negotiate. Because sometimes, right? Because you've got the identity of a parent and the identity of a child all happening in that moment. And it's super complex, right? Now, throw in the fact that you're maybe also a spouse. Well, crap. Now I've got 3 identities I'm trying to navigate and negotiate, right? Are you with me? The fact that you and I, we constantly live in what's called an intersectional reality. You are constantly negotiating the ways in which your identities all intersect and overlap. And it's complicated and it's hard. So when somebody says, for instance, well, the black experience is X, right? Or African Americans vote like Y, right? That's inappropriate because that is distilling a group or a person to one of their identities, right? So therefore, it is important to be mindful of an individual and all of their identities that they bring to the table. So, the Haitian black mother, right, is going to have a different set of identities and perspective, right, than the Moroccan, you know what I mean? Like we're going to all be different. And we know that, but we sometimes group people together by just what is perceived as some primary identity marker. So you're a white guy, you're in your 70s, you live in America, cool, you are a Republican. You're a young person with colored hair that's kind of not white but not black, cool, you live in New York, cool, you're a crazy liberal. Right? Like we are, it's bonkers, but we do it all the time. Right? We do it all the time. But the Methodist Church and our principles say that each of us has multiple identities. Multiple identities. And those identities are of equal weight. If somebody were to say, what's more important to you, being a parent or being a child? Well, that's a ridiculous question, right? They are equally important. How could you say one is more important than the other, right? What's more important, being an African American or being a female? Well, that's ridiculous. They're equally important, right? So intersectionality is sometimes in our culture wars and in theological circles is a word that is weaponized to encourage. I've experienced this, I've seen this, I've read it, I've been in these conversations, is weaponized because we don't know what it means, and so then it must be some sort of code word to permit some sort of moral laxitude, right? People are using these fancy words to kind of squirm things into the book or into our lives that we don't like. No, it's a recognition that each individual is a mystery unto themselves. Anybody ever read that before? Augustine? I am a mystery unto myself. If you think you know yourself, you would be the first person in the history of the world that knows themselves. And frankly, once you do find out who you are and you know yourself completely, chances are you'll be bored. You know? Part of life is the constant evolving understanding of the mystery. I noted this before, and I'll end on this note. But when we say mystery in the church, just as a reminder, we don't mean puzzle to be solved. A mystery isn't a puzzle that you solve. A mystery is something that has endless solutions. It's not that there's one understanding of a mystery, it's that there's an endless amount of understandings of the mystery. You can never come to its completion. You're constantly understanding it more fully, but you never arrive, right? If you understand a puzzle, you've solved it, and you take that Sudoku and you set it aside and say, check, done, I never have to think about it again, right? That's a puzzle. God's not a puzzle, right? You're not a puzzle. You're a mystery. Which is why my wife, for instance, we've been married now for a while, I don't know how long, but she will sometimes sit across the dinner table from me and look at me, and I'll say something, and she'll say, what? And I'll say, yeah, blah, 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 blah. And she's like, I never knew that about you. How could we have possibly been married this long? And now you're telling me you can't stand red jelly beans or whatever it is. So, it's that mystery that actually, draws us into deeper connection and relationship and love, frankly, right? So, as a reminder, I just want to caution us as we move into General Conference or you move out in the world, particularly in political seasons, there's going to be words that are thrown about. And if you don't know what they mean, just pause and just really be aware that our social principles suggest that thoughtful people are doing really beautiful work to try to understand the deep mysteries of this world. They're not trying to solve them, they're just trying to understand them. And to be frightened by those who are trying to seek or have greater, fuller awareness of mystery, and to think that they're just trying to solve the puzzle is a problem. If you think people are out there trying to solve the puzzle, then you're going to think that you're a problem that other people are trying to fix. And nobody likes to be fixed. You know what I mean? Nobody, oh, here's your problem. Let me tell you your problem, and I'll tell you how to fix you. Oh, yeah, I can tell you go to hell. I don't want to hear it. You know what I mean? Nobody appreciates that. But you are a mystery, and as a mystery, I would love to learn more about you so I can better understand you. Now, that's completely different. It just is. Yes? Right. Yeah, I think that I do think that people, that human beings, we're all pretty insecure anyway. We're all very insecure. Even the best of us just kind of fake it. And yeah, whenever we're asked, sometimes it can be taken as it feels like a personal attack. And perhaps that's tied up with this notion of mystery and puzzle, maybe. Yeah, I don't know. Okay, so just a reminder, I just want to offer that up to viewers or participants. Each of us, not just marginalized communities, each of us have multiple identities of equal and greater value that intersect to form our complete self. Which means sometimes we're going to do things that are incongruent with who we are because one value is going to win out over another, right? Or one identity is going to win out in that moment over another. I would never yell at my children, right? Never yell at my children. I'm the pastor and a dad. My kids are here. I'm never going to yell at them. Never. Never. Now, when we get home, though, right, and that pastor identity isn't, are you with me? That's not going to win out. At home, it's different, right? It's how it is. Sometimes one identity wins out over another. It doesn't mean that the church or you as an individual are necessarily hypocritical. It could mean that you are just complex. And that perhaps that complexity is reflected in our social lives as well. And that perhaps we ought to engage one another with a little more humility than just presumption. If you'll turn over on page 111, under marriage, section C. Okay, 1040. We affirm the sanctity of marriage, of the marriage covenant that's expressed in love, mutual support, personal commitment, and shared fidelity between a man and a woman. We believe that God's blessing rests upon such marriage, whether or not there are children of the union. We reject social norms that assume different standards for women than men in marriage. We support laws in civil society that define marriage as the union of one man and one woman. See Judicial Council 694. That's our current position, social principle on marriage. Okay? Perhaps you can see in that social principle question or response what have been the pressing questions over the years. Not once, but twice. It's reaffirmed that marriage is between one man and one woman, right? Or a man and woman, right? Okay. The proposed change to social principles. This proposed change comes by way of the United Methodist Global Call to Social Action, which over 4,000 United Methodists from around the world participated in an 8-year process to review and update these social principles. It was completed in 2020, and so this new draft reflects the UM response to today's most pressing social issues. It's pending 2024 adoption, okay? So this isn't a social principle. This is what's being proposed. I just read our social principle on marriage. Here's the proposed change. Within the church, we affirm marriage as a sacred, lifelong covenant that brings two people of faith into union with one another and into deeper relationship with God and the religious community. The United Methodist Church does not recognize marriage as a sacrament. We celebrate and cherish this union as an expression of the couple's faith, grounded in their relationship with God and one another. Marriage thus reflects a continued willingness to grow together in Christ and a commitment to cultivate a covenantal bond that encompasses intimacy, grace, and love. As members of a larger society, we also affirm the importance of civil marriage, the legal recognition of domestic unions by the state. Such legal recognition is vital for guaranteeing family stability and the orderly regulation of inheritances, and for providing assurance that spouses and children are afforded all the rights, benefits, and protections to which they are entitled. Now, I know I just verbally read those, and it's hard to see because you're not looking at them, the differences. But what differences did you catch? Yeah, the reiteration of one man and one woman is lacking. What other differences did you see or hear? Because this document was looked at by over 4,000 United Methodists from around the world, it's asking or addressing another set of questions that maybe you and I aren't asking, but other people around the world are. That last paragraph, for instance, we affirm such legal civil marriage, right? It's vital for guaranteeing family stability. Okay. And the orderly regulation of inheritances. Is that a problem here in the United States? You know, like someone dies and like, well, where does the estate go? Where's all the money? That's not a question here. We have lots of norms and laws that kind of regulate all that. Why is that here? And for providing the assurances that spouses and children are afforded all the rights, benefits, and protections to which they are entitled. Is that something that we really, do we spend a lot of time here in the United States wondering, well, if one person of the marriage dies, what happens? We have laws and rules. There's insurance, there's lawyer, there's all this apparatus around it. That might not be true for other parts of the world, so much so that they felt it was important to put it in the social principles. Now here we are for years, since 76 or 78 or whatever, arguing, is marriage between one man and one woman, and it gets in there twice, but not once, not one single mention in our current principles around marriage related to these questions around inheritance, family stability, and social responsibility. Not once, right? Now, I'm not condemning or condoning one way or the other. What I am saying is that these revised social principles acknowledge that we are a global community, and we are not, as United States, should be the only voice that gets to dictate anything about marriage. Full stop. And if the other members of our global community said, look, we can let that whole one man, one woman thing go, that's fine. Can we put that stuff in there about the inheritance? Maybe we've misunderstood where some of the values and real problems of the world reside. Are you with me? So when individuals are saying, well, we're going to jettison the current social principles and adopt a whole new one, and it's just a Trojan horse for whatever, okay, fine. Read the darn thing. What did I just read that you might disagree with? Is there anything in there you cannot affirm? Are there things in there that you never thought about before? That thought, oh my gosh, that has now opened up the horizon for my concern for my sisters and brothers on the global south, perhaps. Oh my gosh, I maybe shouldn't be dunking on where I live right now in the state of affairs because maybe there are some social norms and beautiful laws that actually I just take for granted. And so maybe I can be a little proud of where I live. Are you with me? So, I'm not trying to get on a diatribe, but I just want to, these social principles, back to your point, have been weaponized so much over the years, down to subsections of subsections, that we're kind of, in my opinion, missing really, really deep hurts of the world. We just don't even address them. But the revised social principles at least begin to address concerns that are outside of the left-right divide here in the United States. And I would argue that when we say we believe in the holy, universal, Catholic, global church, that maybe that's a better reflection of what we actually say we affirm in our creeds than just, I believe in the church that's reflected here in the United States. Are you with me? Okay. You don't have to agree with me. This is just what I'm offering. If you want to turn the page, I guess it's also notable that there's a section D, divorce. There's also a section of divorce in the new social principles. But for whatever it's worth, here's another section in the social principles that's revised that's worth considering. A whole section on child marriage. There's a whole section on polygamy. There's another section on divorce. All of those three things are under the section of marriage. So marriage, and then we have subsection child marriage. And it's long. A whole section on polygamy and a whole section on divorce. In our current discipline, we have a section on marriage, a section on divorce, and single persons, which is also here. So we're not even talking about child marriage at present. We're not talking about polygamy at present. But these are questions that are around the world. If you want to look on page 112, under men and women, section F, we reject the erroneous notion that one gender is superior to another, that one gender must strive against another, and that members of one gender may receive love, power, and esteem only at the expense of others. This isn't a tradition I grew up with, but there's something called complementarianism and what's it called? The other one. I don't know. It's this idea in some religious traditions where men and women kind of complement one another, where I have some skills and you have some skills, but my skills are valued in the marketplace and your skills are valued at home. So therefore, you should stay at home and I should go in the marketplace. And it creates, over time, kind of this one superior than the other in different realms. Are you with me? So it can create the kind of framework by which men are then able to preach, but women are not, right? But in the United Methodist Church, we're saying, no, that's that notion that one gender is better than the other, that's bunk. And so when women get paid 78 cents on the dollar for men, that's a problem, right? For doing the same work, that's a problem, right? We understand our gender diversity to be a gift from God intended to add to the rich variety of human experience and perspective, and we guard against attitudes and traditions that would use this good gift to leave members of one sex more vulnerable in relationship than members of another. Just let that set in. We understand our gender diversity to be a gift from God, right? So, when there's someone who expresses gender diversity that you and I might feel uncomfortable with, we may be prone to then start pitting my gender or traditional understanding of gender against how they're expressing gender, right? Which contradicts the erroneous notion that one gender is superior to another. Are you with me? So I understand that I don't know much about gender fluidity. I'll admit, I don't know much about it. It's new to me, and I'm learning, and I'm trying. And I've misstepped, and I don't know what I'm doing sometimes, and maybe some of it's bad, and maybe some of it's good. I don't know. But I promise you, as a clergy person here at Keller, we're not going to use language that degregates something we don't know. So if you're watching online or you're here in the room or whatever, you should hear, I hope that you hear, at least at Keller United Methodist Church, as long as we remain compliant with this book of discipline and strive for these social principles, we're not going to use language or set up ministries that's going to degradate that which we don't know. And frankly, we just don't know a lot about gender fluidity. I don't. And that's support. And I read these sections of our book of discipline as supporting evidence as to why we're going to do that, because we just don't know, and so we're going to use language appropriately. Just as a side note, under human sexuality, this is where we're getting into the hot button stuff. Sexuality is God's good gift to all persons. We call everyone to responsible stewardship of the sacred gift. Although all persons are sexual beings, whether or not they are married, sexual relations are affirmed only with the covenant of monogamous heterosexual marriage. So any pre-marital or extramarital, no. But we don't list those out. We just list that which is. If you turn over to page 113, this is what's called the incompatibility clause. Has anybody heard that phrase before? The incompatibility clause. I'll just read this in total. We affirm that all persons are individuals of sacred worth, created in the image of God. All persons need the ministry of the church in their struggles for human fulfillment, as well as the spiritual and emotional care of a fellowship that enables reconciling relationships with God, others, and within self. The United Methodist Church does not condone the practice of homosexuality and considers the practice incompatible with Christian teaching. We affirm that God's grace is available to all. We will seek to live together in Christian community, welcoming, forgiving, and loving one another as Christ has loved and accepted us. We will implore families and churches, not to reject or condemn lesbian and gay members and friends. We commit ourselves to be in the ministry for and with all persons. So that phrase there, the United Methodist Church does not condone the practice of homosexuality and considers the practice incompatible with Christian teaching. That maybe you know, that has caused a lot of harm in some folks' hearts. Not necessarily the first part, frankly, because in the United Methodist Church, in this, maybe you read it a lot, that the United Methodist Church doesn't condone a lot of things, right? Okay, fine. We can argue about if we condone it or not, fine, okay? But what's been harmful to folks is the second. It's the and. We do not condone the practice of homosexuality, and it's the double. And we consider this practice incompatible with Christian teaching. There's nothing else in here that's listed as and incompatible with Christian teaching. Can you think of anything that is incompatible with Christian teaching? Anything else? Murder? Well, let's just stick with the top 10. Murder, incompatible with Christian teaching. Not stated that it's incompatible with Christian teaching. So one of the arguments to remove that is saying, like, look, we can argue about if we condone it or not, but to say that this one thing is incompatible, knowing full and well that there's lots of things that are incompatible, we either need to remove the incompatibility clause or start listing out everything that's incompatible. You know what I mean? Like that's the argument. Why are you singling out this one thing and therefore creating conditions by which we actually are pitting sexes and genders against one another, right? Perhaps not intentionally, but unintentionally that's the downstream effect, right? I went to a soccer game. I went to an American, USA versus Bolivia, U.S. men's soccer game years and years ago. It was a prelim game. And I had my American jersey on. Hooray. And I was super glad my soccer coach got some tickets, and they were super cheap. And I realized as soon as I got there why they were super cheap. We were sitting on the Bolivian side. And I didn't know that when we got there, but when everybody's in green and I'm in red, white, and blue, I was like, oh, no. Now, needless to say, this was just a soccer game. It was a friendly. It had nothing to do with actually qualifying for the World Cup or anything like that. It's just a friendly. But I can't tell you at the age of 13 how uncomfortable I was in a sea of green, right? Wearing white. This had nothing to do with my personhood. It had nothing to do with my practice of life. It had nothing to do with my pursuit of love. It was just me watching a soccer game, and I felt second class in that group. They weren't trying to, right? But they made it known that I was out of alignment. Thank God we tied. So one could imagine that it's not the intent. If I could steel man the argument, it's not the intent, right, to single out a group of people and make them feel inferior. I'm willing to bet that's not the intent. I'll give the benefit of the doubt. However, when everyone's wearing a green jersey and you show up to church wearing a white one, you immediately feel something. Even if that's not their intent, that's what happens. When we say everything, that there's a whole lot of things that we don't condone, and there's one thing that we find incompatible, and you happen to do that one thing, you're going to feel something. You're going to feel like this place, this church, your church, that you've given your prayers, presence, gift, service, and witness to, they don't care about you. And that maybe you don't belong. And that maybe in some way you're actually kind of inferior. And that maybe in some way that justifies our ability to speak ill of you and cast you out. Are you with me? It's just the framework that can create conditions where it's incredibly problematic. Under the revised social principles that's being put forth, I'll just read. It's titled Human Sexuality. It's in the Nurturing Community section, Section C, Human Sexuality. We affirm human sexuality as a sacred gift and acknowledge that sexual intimacy contributes to fostering the emotional, spiritual, and physical well-being of individuals and to nurturing healthy sexual relationships that are grounded in love, care, and respect. You all right with that? Cool. Human sexuality is an healthy and natural part of life that is expressed in wonderfully diverse ways from birth to death. It is shaped by a combination of nature and nurture, heredity and genetic factors on the one hand, and childhood development and environment on the other. We further honor the diversity of choices and vocations in relation to sexuality such as celibacy, marriage, and singleness. Okay. Finally, we support the rights of all people to exercise personal consent in sexual relationships, to make decisions about their own bodies and be supported in those decisions, to receive comprehensive sexual education, to be free from sexual exploitation and violence, and to have access to adequate sexual health care. Period. Human sexuality according to the revised social principles that is being put forth at the General Conference this year. I don't know how you feel about that. But again, notice the questions that are being addressed in that statement versus the questions that are being raised or questioned or answered or responded to in these statements, right? I'm not saying one's better than the other. I'm saying that they're addressing different sets of questions and perhaps broader questions than just those in the United States, questions that are from around the world, right? So things that you and I were like, well, yeah, of course, we should support singleness and celibacy. Like, why is that even in there? Yeah, why is that even in there, right? It's probably in there, presumably, because it's addressing a real need. It needs to be addressed. Okay, we're at 11 o'clock, and I do want to cover the abortions piece, if that's okay, and I know that we're overlooking some others, because that's the other kind of piece in the zeitgeist and on our hearts these days. I didn't get a chance, because I had a printer issue, to find the... I can't find the statement on abortion in the revised social principles. I'll get that later, but let's just address page 114. First, just note the length of this section. It starts on page 114, kind of there at the bottom 2/3, right, or the bottom third. It goes all the way to the bottom there. It picks back up at the top of 115. It goes all the way to the bottom of 115. So we have a page and a half on this matter, right? Sexual harassment, the one right above it is, we'll call it half a page. And ministry with those who have experienced an abortion on the next page is what, a fifth of a page. So just kind of the things around it kind of should suggest, just looking at the length and amount of words per section, it's a signal, right? It doesn't necessarily say something other than there's a lot of thought that's put into one area. Okay, our belief on page 114, our belief in the sanctity of unborn human life makes us reluctant to approve abortion. But we are equally bound to respect the sacredness of the life and well-being of a mother and unborn child. Notice we have multiple identities in tension with one another here. What do we do here, right? We recognize tragic conflicts of life with life that may justify abortion. And in such cases, we support the legal option of abortion under proper medical procedures by certified medical providers. So as a denomination, we are okay with abortion under certain circumstances. Okay? That language, though, can be squishy. For instance, who gets to determine when conflicts of life with life that may justify, who gets to determine that? And maybe you've noticed in American conversations these days that that's being discussed in the courts. Who gets to determine, legislators or doctors and the client, patient? Who gets to determine what is life-threatening or not? Right? Because even that phrase seems ambiguous. So there are some folks that are unable to receive because doctors are unwilling for reasons that they have to provide care because they're not sure if it's legal or not. And so now we have situations where individuals are now put in really, really difficult situations. Who gets to determine that? We oppose, on next page, we oppose the use of late-term abortions, right? Except, I don't know if you guys caught that. Of course, partial birth abortions and late-term abortions, as you know, numerically are so very minimal compared to the vast majority of abortions that happen. But in those extreme circumstances, here we are. We oppose this process or this practice, except when the physical life of the mother is in danger and no other medical procedure is available, or in the case of severe fatal I can't say that word, I apologize. Say it. Anomalies incompatible with life. So again, we are against it unless we're for it, right? I mean, it is complicated. It's just complicated. And so for me, I'll just speak for me. For me as a clergy person to stand up here and start making decrees around science, right? Which I think we read on the first pages I shouldn't be doing. For me to start making decrees about science becomes incredibly problematic, even more so for an entire denomination. So we defer as a denomination. Typically, we are deferring to the patient and the doctor to make those decisions. And then praying for and being in ministry with, that's a tough situation, and that's a terrible choice that anybody has to make. Period. It just is. And so we as a church are not going to continue to lump or heap coals on someone who's already gone through a terrible, terrible choice. On 115, we call all Christians to a searching and prayerful inquiry into the sorts of conditions that may cause them to consider abortion. We entrust God to provide guidance, wisdom, and discernment to those facing unintended pregnancies, right? Moving with some caution here. Maybe there's a reason that somebody is seeking an abortion. Maybe they're not just a baby killer, right? Maybe there's a reason. And maybe before we start casting stones or disparaging remarks, maybe we should enter with some curiosity and compassion and humility in the midst of this. It's one of the more, I find that statement to be really, really profound as a church. Because the church, the United Methodist Church, in that statement is not just speaking to the United Methodist Church. Did you catch that? We call all Christians, all of our sisters and brothers in the denomination and around the world, everybody, to maybe slow your roll on your condemning words around this matter and maybe prayerfully inquire what's happening in these situations. I find that to be pretty remarkable, that it's one of the ways that the United Methodist Church, it's one of the examples where the UMC is calling our ecumenical sisters and brothers to responsible and faithful action rather than just saying, you better get with us or you're against us. Does that make sense? Okay, last thing. We support crisis pregnancy centers and pregnancy resource centers. Government laws and regulations do not provide all of the guidance required by the informed Christian conscience. Therefore, a decision at the very bottom paragraph. Therefore, a decision concerning abortion should be made only after thoughtful and prayerful consideration by the parties involved with medical, family, pastoral, and other appropriate counsel. I don't see the word legal counsel in there. Right? We as a church are saying that maybe you shouldn't have to consult a lawyer to receive the health care that you need in a terrible situation. We're medical, family, pastoral, and other appropriate. Okay. Okay, I'm at way over. I don't mean to just skip other things. It's all really good. I mean, it is. It's all really good to consider and to think about and to ponder. How about we do this? I'll do this. I will, Let's look to paragraph 162, the social community onward, next time, okay? And we'll do our best to move through that faithfully. I will also send out, I've got the most revised version, the final draft of the revised social principles in a PDF. I will add that to the email that I'll send tomorrow, just so that you have it. You can look at it or not, but just so you have it, and kind of, if you want to do a compare and contrast, that's great, or not. And then next time when we get together, we'll try to move from section 3 all the way to the end. I can't guarantee that we will get to the end, but please do your best. I'm looking at the calendar just as a thing here. Next Wednesday, the 10th, we'll meet. And I don't know. Oh, that's right, the 17th. The 17th in the evening. That's why. The evening of the 17th, if you're interested and you weren't at the first one, we'll have a general conference information sharing Wednesday evening on the 17th, in which we'll unpack some of the larger pieces of legislation, including but not limited to the revised social principles. Y'all will have a leg up. You don't have to attend. It's not mandatory, but if you want to. We already did one back in last month, and we'll do another one this month on the 17th, which is why we will not have underground seminary that day. So we'll prep for that night. Okay. Last thing, thank you so much for being here today. I just want to acknowledge that I feel pretty vulnerable in sharing some of my thoughts on some of this. Some of it was a little anecdotal. Some of it was just my own kind of thinkings on it. It wasn't just reading the book of discipline to you. And so if you find areas of disagreement or contention, or if I said something that was in some way contrary or conflictual to you, I would love to buy you a cup of coffee and hear more and better understand how I can be more acute with my language, because I'm also learning like you all. So if I especially mean that for folks that are watching later, especially these folks have time afterwards to tell me as soon as it's over. But if you have something that I've said something on the recording that you would like to follow up with, please know that I'm always available. Even as I misstep, I would like to learn to not to step on so many toes as we dance together. So with that, grace and peace. Amen. Amen. Thank you all so much.